Hello and welcome to God vs. God, the podcast where we pit ancient deities head to head for the chance at the ultimate comeback. Welcome, Matt.
Hi.
All right, so this week we have Bez and Khonsu. But before we kick that off, last episode, you gave us a little math on the length of our podcast to date,
Yes.
Compared to a number of books. But particularly interesting to me was the audiobook length of the King James version of the Bible.
Yeah.
So, long story short, is that is a long story, and we're not quite there yet.
No, not yet
in terms of length, but
they're not really writing the Bible anymore, and we're still going.
Yeah, so we're catching up.
Yes.
And I suggested last episode that perhaps someday GVG transcripts may one day also be available in every hotel room in America, or ideally worldwide.
That's quite a thought. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you seemed a little bit less enthused. So I want to make the case.
Please, I'm all ears.
Because we, after all, are trying to save the world, again, by hand selecting ancient deities to help us all out.
Right.
And not, I might add, just for believers, or even just for listeners. Ideally, even non-listeners are going to benefit from this, unlike some religions, I could mention.
That's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah. Good call.
Yeah. So, I mean, if it does come down to it, 5-star reviewers and longtime listeners first, obviously.
Yeah, it's certainly. And subscribers, top of the list, no doubt.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, we're not crazy. But the goal is to save everyone. And to even further make the case, I took part of our transcript from the last episode and fed it through Chat GPT and said, translate this into King James Bible translation language.
Wow.
So, this, I'm going to read a little bit of what I got back. So, and this would be, from the Egyptian Testament, the Book of Horus versus Ptah, or something.
Right.
And this would come from the Book of Categories. So, and it starts off, verily, the tale of Horus, though filled with deeds both good and questionable, doth incline toward the side of virtue. There came a time of contention, where Horus engaged in a boat race against his adversary, and in that race he did employ a subtle deceit, using a substance in his boat that granted it buoyancy, surpassing its true nature of the vessel. This act doth cast a shadow upon his character, yet in a broader view he proved to be devoted to his mother, and avenged his father's wrongs, displaying familiar loyalty and honor. Horus, the protector and symbol of justice, stood steadfast, safeguarding the world amid its complexities and struggles, rendering an essential public service, though the decapitation of his mother remains a matter of contention.
That's pretty poetic. I was going to tell you. I wish I could talk that fancy.
Yeah. So when you give the King James spin on it, yeah, it elevates it a little bit.
It does. Very classy. Yeah.
So maybe if the hoteliers of America are listening, there's a little more extra room in the nightstand.
I love it.
That will be available at a wholesale price. So
your case has been made. Argument is convincing.
Yeah. So I think, do you have anything else to add before we kick it off here?
All I was going to say was that, as was teased in an earlier episode, Andrew, you and I did finally get together over the past weekend. We did. A couple of other friends got together in Cleveland, Ohio, and among other things, visited the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is shaped like a pyramid.
Yes.
So because of that, I am writing off the entirety of the weekend as a business expense to God versus God Enterprise, fully tax deductible. Because it reminded me of Egypt. So there you go.
Yes, and we noted the architectural integrity of the pyramid and wrote that down. So
that's right.
If anybody from the IRS is listening,
that's right. For all you tax gatherers out there, all completely above board. That's all I've got. Andrew, let's jump in.
All right, and so we would say, may the best God win, but I think this episode will say, let the mightiest deity prevail.
Oh, yes. All right. Class act.
Classy. All right, so I'm going to present Bez, a god who's different from pretty much any Egyptian god we've presented before, or really any Greco-Roman ones either. So again, name is Bez, sometimes called Besu. And I'll get to what makes him unique in just a minute. But I do want to say one thing that is familiar is that he's a god with a lot of jobs. So primarily, Bez is what is known as an apotropaic god.
All right.
And apotropaic means a protective god who averts evil influences or bad luck. But in addition to that, he is a god of war, he is a god of music, he is a god of sex, and a god of childbirth. You know, so it's a wide range, but all of those are sort of normal deity tasks that they would be assigned to.
Sure.
So he fits in with that. But I think just to get what makes him different, I think we have to start by taking a look at him. So I'm going to do the screen share, and Matt is going to describe for the listener what he's seeing to get an idea of who or what we're dealing with.
Yes. So the listener, please close your eyes for a few seconds to really let your imagination take hold, unless you're driving a car, in which case, don't do that.
Yeah. All right, Matt, could you describe that image for us?
Yes. So this is first of all, very unusual in the sense that this deity appears to be facing us directly. So we're so used to the side view of these Egyptian figures kind of in profile, but Bez appears to be coming at us head on.
Yes.
That's different. He looks, I would say, less sort of lithe and athletic than our normal gods have been. He's a little on the, I'd say, the sort of maybe shorter, pudgier side.
Yeah.
A little bit stocky, maybe would have been the term. He's wearing a very elaborate, looks like a headdress with a series of 5 feathers, in a cap underneath that. So it's pretty striking looking. It's just odd to see an Egyptian figure with both eyes at once, with that front view. He's got kind of a broad nose, kind of some ears that stick out, sort of like Obama style. He's got his tongue sticking out, so I'm sort of getting a sense of whimsy in that. The facial hair is quite interesting. So I'm looking at, looks like each side is kind of a curtain of facial hair on the left and right cheeks with a curl at the bottom. He's got the chin appears to be shaved, so almost an homage or a foreshadowing of President Chester A. Arthur a long time later. He looks like he's got some sort of mini leopard sort of skin, I guess, like almost like a tiny leopard over his shoulders with as some sort of coat.
Right.
Seeing a couple of wristbands. I'm seeing a little green belt, and apart from that, he appears to be nude. I mean, you know, with the there's no visible genitalia on this fellow, at least in this image.
Yeah.
So nothing that would make it unfamily friendly. But apart from that little green belt, he appears to be fully unclothed.
Yep, you're right. I think you've got most of the highlights there. So I'm going to stop the share. So you picked up on the fact that he is, yes, indeed facing forward. One of the very few Egyptian deities who is facing forward.
So he's ready for action.
He's ready for action. Yes. He is themed to be a dwarf. So, you know, he would have the proportions that we normally see somebody who had dwarfism. Shorter legs, slightly larger head. He's wearing that ostrich feather crown, which never really gets explained, but he wears it quite often.
Yeah, it's good look.
He's got the leopard skin kind of jauntily over his shoulders in kind of a preppy sweater sort of vibe.
That's right, yeah.
And there's a little bit of a story of that. And it is indeed a modern interpretation. So though he appears to be naked, his genitals are not depicted in this. But that is in contrast to many of the amulets or statues of Bez from ancient times, where his genitals were depicted, and sometimes quite prominently.
I see.
You know, and again, his face is not what we would call conventionally handsome.
It's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. So one writer described Bez's appearance as being charmingly hideous. So, with less a generous way to describe it.
Yes.
Not sure if he had that on his Match.com profile or not.
I doubt it.
But this his signature look. We believe had a purpose, which we'll talk a bit about later. He had that belt that you mentioned,
Right.
and that is a belt that is also similar to, I guess, a belt that Hercules would sometimes be seen wearing. There's a belt of healing. Okay. So he has both that leopard's around his shoulders and the belt have a little bit of a shout out to Hercules, a little bit of a commonality in there, and
gotcha.
nobody would really know which one came first, but they do share those qualities. So and then to get back into the name, in terms of his name, I found a number of different possibilities. Perhaps just it's a one syllable word with 3 letters, so there's a lot of plausible things that could have spun off the word Bez.
Sure.
So one possibility that was interesting is ancient Egyptian word meaning protector. That's very similar. And then there's another from the ancient Nubian language that meant cat. And then another Egyptian one that would have meant the dancer. And so those all have plausible connections to the character of Bez, as we'll see. And then also, I like to go into the epithets. Kind of gives us a character, how they were thought of, what the Egyptians, how they really referred to them. So first one is Bez, who comes from the land of the gods. Interesting.
Seems fitting, yeah.
Yeah, but Bez is always thought to have coming from a distance. Bez, the Lord of Punt. And Punt, Punt is where Eritrea is now, on the coast of what used to be Ethiopia, but that's he's the Lord thereof.
For a second, I thought you were talking about kicking on 4th down.
Yeah,
that makes more sense. Yeah,
yeah. He's very pro sabermetrics. So, Bez, the god, the dwarf god. So, which self-explanatory.
Sure.
Bez, the fighter. Okay. Again, Bez, the dancer. And so this one, again, the name, and it also, he apparently is often depicted at Hathor's festival of drunkenness, or Tefnut's festival. So, and having a good time at the party, dancing.
Yeah,
that's kind of the kind of god he is. And then the last one I have is Bez, supporter of everything good and hater of everything evil.
I mean, how do you argue with that?
That's pretty
right
good.
Where you want to land.
Yeah, that's good. It's hard. Yeah, it is hard to argue with that. So with that Punt epithet and some of the other evidence, like the name, there's long been a theory that worship of Bez actually originated outside of Egypt, possibly in Punt or Nubia, both of which were lands to the south of Egypt and what's now Sudan or Eritrea. And then there were theories about his worship could have started in Asia Minor also. However, modern scholarship leans towards Bez probably being a homegrown Egyptian deity. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom have references to a Bez-like dwarf protective god or gods, but they don't name Bez, for example. So it's hard to say, but it does seem like at first there were a group of dwarf deities that were protective, so kind of a protection by committee. But by the Middle Kingdom, the Egyptians start to think of them really as just different roles for Bez, and at that point, his popularity starts to kind of take off. And so, despite being kind of an appearance challenged deity, Bez amulets and statuettes were very popular, and there are many of them that survive to this day. So everything from, like, they had these birthing centers that had walls where they would depict Bez on it. They had pharaohs' tombs where Bez would be depicted. Just people's headboards, you find a head of Bez on it, or cosmetic jars for women that are made where the whole jar looks like it is a statue of Bez, or women's inner thighs would have a tattoo
Really?
Of Bez on it. So anywhere you could carve something, tattoo something, whatever the case may be, that they just want to stick that apotropaic deity on there to give you a little extra protection. So
that's iconic almost.
Yeah, he did become quite iconic, I think. So the monstrous appearance actually may have played a role here in it was to advertise Bez's fierceness and acting as a warning to demons and evil spirits that the holder of this image had a tough, no-nonsense deity on their side and better just keep moving.
All right. So despite his smaller stature, he had a fierceness that would still make him capable of protection and intimidation.
Oh yeah, quite so. But there's a different theory that his kind of monstrous looks were actually the result of the many battles with demons and serpents that he had, and he had been quite attractive, and that roughed up his good looks. So that is a contra theory that is like a prize fighter who's gone a couple too many rounds.
There may be another theory about how that came to be later in the program.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yes.
All right. So again, Bez's most frequent call to battle actually was defending women in childbirth and newborn babies. So pretty good, pretty noble calling that he's got there. And this extended from peasant households up to the pharaohs and even up to his fellow gods. So for mortals, pregnant women would often start once they were pregnant, knew they were pregnant, start wearing a Bez amulet around to gather the protection of the god. There were these birthing centers which would have depictions of Bez alongside his working partner and possible consort, a goddess named Tawaret, who was a childbirth goddess in her own right, who had a hippo head and lion's paws and a crocodile tail.
Wow.
So
I guess that's one way to look less monstrous, is hang out with somebody with that look.
Yeah. So both a fearsome couple possibly, but there also was a deity named Beset, who was basically a female version of Bez, and there's some things say she may have been considered his wife, but that again is not really definitive. What the nature of that relationship was. She was more human overall appearance, and again she would show up in some of those birth scenes working with alongside Bez. So when they were in childbirth, prayers would be said, and if during that birthing process there was a difficulty for either the mother or child, the midwife would put up that Bez signal by putting a statue of Bez by the mother's head, letting the god know that he was needed, and presumably he would suit up, swoop in, save both the mother and child. We don't have any actual statistics on infant mortality in Egypt, but I assume it was obviously much lower than anywhere else because they had Bez, right?
That's right. That's secret weapon. Yeah.
Yep. So with the gods, this was an ongoing concern as well, giving rise to a form of what we sometimes call cosmological Bez, because just as most deities, they had to do their turn on that solar bark protecting Ra.
Right.
Bez had a very special time for it, and he would have to show up at dawn every day for the daily birth of Ra as an infant every morning to make sure everything went to plan. So, and unlike with human babies, we do know that he had a perfect record on the Ra birth because the sun did continue to come up every day throughout the 3,000 years of ancient Egypt. So
yeah, and he was working. He drew the early shift.
Yeah, he had the early shift. Though I think he grew out. Ra would grow out of that, so it wasn't a long shift, but you did have to be available.
Very important.
Yeah, and unlike some American states that I can mention, the Bez's protection of infants did not stop at birth. Actually, parents would draw an image on a child's left hand as a protection. Perhaps when the kid was sick. So we know that, and we also have an example of a surviving protective prayer to Bez that is believed to have been called the Magic Lullaby. So I'm going to read a little bit of that. And it says, "Run out, thou who comest in darkness, who enterest in stealth, her nose behind her, her face turned backward, who loses that for which she came. Comest thou to harm him? I will not let thee harm him. Comest thou to take him away? I will not let thee take him away from me. I have the protection against thee out of the Ephet herb. It makes pain, out of onions, which harm thee, out of honey, which is sweet to living men, but bitter to those who are dead, out of the evil parts of the Ebdu fish, out of the jaw of the merit, out of the backbone of the perch. Bez is my guard upon his perch. He will not let thee harm him." So this...
Wait, that's a lullaby?
Well, they may have said it in a different tone of voice than I did.
It's like kind of an intense warning. It sounds like a recipe. There's all sorts of food items. Okay, wow.
Yeah. So apparently, parents. I don't know how seriously they take this. They would maybe make this pungent mixture with honey, onions, and fish parts, and then sing this as a lullaby.
It'd be enough to keep me away. It sounds terrible. Yeah.
And that would keep malevolent spirits away from your toddler. So
great. It's too bad your daughter's so much older than that. That would have been really come in handy back in the old days.
Right, yeah. So but any of our listeners out there want to give it a try, let us know how many evil spirits show up. We'd appreciate that.
We'll start tracking it.
Yeah. So we'll probably get more people who are going to volunteer to be the control group rather than the. Right. But in addition to protecting children, Bez would also entertain them as the god of humor and dance. So whenever a small child or baby would smile or laugh for no reason, Egyptians would say that it was because Bez was dancing or making faces at the child that only the child could see, which is kind of a nice thing. It's nicer than, I think today we usually say just, oh, he probably had gas.
That's gas. Yeah. Let's bring the Bez one back. That's much more pleasant.
Yeah, it's a little nicer for the child. So Bez also was said to have been a protector of Horus, the child. So in that short period between his birth and his challenge to old Uncle Set for the throne of Egypt, the story goes that Horus's mother, Isis, was out collecting provisions for Horus when they're in that swamp area. And in that time she was gone, Bez was bitten by a poisonous snake. So when Isis gets back, he's sick, she's very distraught. And she lets out a scream so loud and terrifying that it stops the solar bark and the sun in its tracks in the sky.
Wow.
And so the gods, I guess, kind of all peer out over the side of the solar bark to say, what the heck was that? What's the ruckus? And they see it's Isis. They, who do they send? Well, actually, they sent Thoth. But he cures Horus, make a kind of promise to extend the protection to all human children's.
Yeah.
But there were stones of different sizes that would depict the story, and what they would show is that Bez was depicted floating above the baby Horus, indicating that he was part of that promise of protection for all the Egyptian children. So, unfortunately, we don't get, that's one part of portraying Bez in a podcast. There's image is on nearly sort of every object imaginable. It's on beds, it's on tombstones, it's on knives, magic wands, all sorts of he's in all sorts of interesting poses, fighting snakes, dressed as a soldier, watching over Horus, as well as some others we'll talk about in a little bit. But as a god of sort of the people, Egyptologists believe that there are probably many folk tales about Bez, but none of them really come down to us intact. But with these images and the magic of AI hallucination, I think we can get a little bit of an idea of what those stories might have sounded like. So this is just a bit of a chat GPT exposition on a possible folktale based on that Stella image. And again, in the style of the King James Bible. So
of course, yes.
Yeah. So In his gratitude, Horus, though of young age, displays wisdom beyond his years. He gazed upon Thoth with eyes brimming with reverence, and vowed to dedicate himself to the protection of human children of Egypt, just as Thoth had safeguarded him in his hour of need. Bez, the jolly protective deity, was deeply moved by the tender heart and noble promise of Horus the child, and pledged his unwavering devotion to the sacred cause, recognizing the divine call to shield the innocent from harm. And from that moment forward, Horus the child and Bez stood resolute guardians, watchful over the human children of Egypt as they traversed the land, bustling cities to humble villages, ensuring no harm would befall the vulnerable and defenseless. So that is the Chat GPT version of what is happening in those stellae. So
quite eloquent, yes,
quite eloquent and beautiful and completely made up. So, so not sure how much weight we want to give to that AI generated hallucination, but I am pretty sure that Bez would be happy with that description. So, so Bez, as I said, Bez's popularity only grows. He gets taken up not only by the Egyptians, but throughout the Mediterranean, the Greeks, Phoenicians, and the Romans. Legionnaires in the Roman army start to wear amulets of Bez with a little soldier outfit on it for protection.
Adorable.
And one of the buildings that has been uncovered in Pompeii in Italy has a Bez wall painting on it where he appears to be sitting on a little bench, maybe in a waiting room or a timeout of some sort. Hard to know. But it is very clearly him. But in Egypt, you sort of know it when you made it as a god, when they start mixing you with the other big deities. And this happened in the form of pantheistic Bez, which is a mix and match of Bez and a number of other deities. And so I'm going to do, again, with the screen share and take a look at that and what we have here. And this is the pantheistic Bez version. So you want to give that one a go, Matt?
Yeah, it looks like less stout, a little more. It still has kind of an oversized head and still that Chester A. Arthur beard going. Crown is similar. It looks like there's sort of two outcroppings to his sides, almost as though he were wearing a set of wings.
Yes.
Or being an early practitioner of hang gliding. I guess it's probably not that.
No. So that are the wings of Horus.
Okay, those are wings. All right.
Yeah, those are the wings of Horus. And you may notice, like, to the side of his head, there's something kind of popping out there, and that is Sobek. Who is popping out. And then on the other side is believed to be Bastet on there. And then I'm going to stop.
So a little cat and a little alligator. Yeah.
A little cat, and he's got a little alligator. And I believe somewhere in there, there's supposed to be Anubis also on there. So this pantheistic Bez, I'll stop the share, was thought to, he called sort of a calling together of all the deities with Bez as their head in whenever you had to really need protection. And I guess so. The note on this image said that also you have Tarawet in there. There's the Apis bull and Amun, who's the god of storms, I believe. So just all sorts of deities that got called together, in the form of Bez, and just sort of showing how far he had come from being one of many dwarf deities to the head of this sort of chimera of Egyptian deities, and so that is my effort to reconstruct the story of Bez, a god of the people, an apotropaic deity, god of dance, and a god of fighting, and a candidate for our golden ale.
Very nice. I can't help but be curious. The proportion, you may not know this, but the proportion in his iconography when he shows up in all these different places with a phallus out versus the phallus not out, does it feel like the normal version was phallocentric, or is that unclear?
That was a minority version that was phallocentric, but there was those were definitely out there.
Excellent. So, very good. Well,
the one that we saw, the last one we saw, I think had maybe some damage on it, so it's not clear which one that would have fallen into.
It's probably been through a lot in a few thousand years, so we'll let that slide. Very good. Well, a fascinating character. Another one I had very little knowledge about. So
me as well.
from humble beginnings, seems like he achieved quite a bit and ended up as a sort of a one-man Avengers of other deities in the pantheistic form. Good job. Excellent. Well, take a little rest. Let's have a breather on that. And when we come back out of the break, we'll get to part 2 with Khonsu right after this.
All right.
And we are back. We just heard from Andrew about Bez, the protector of the home and dwarf god. We're not going to talk about Khonsu in our second part, the moon god. So before anything else, without further ado, let us have Andrew's take on an image of Khonsu. Can you see it?
Yes, I can.
All right. Tell us what you see.
All right. So we have a more typical side view of a deity. He's got a bird head. I believe that is a falcon head.
Yes.
And on top of it is, what looks like kind of a ball in a bowl, but I'm guessing that is maybe a crescent and some sort of disc in that crescent.
Right.
Further down, he is carrying the ankh. He's got a tail that is pointed down.
Yes.
And the man's skirt. And he has a symbol of rule that that's the set scepter.
Yes.
He's definitely decked out with sweatbands and looking like he's ready for action.
Very good. So you've done well. The falcon head, clearly the most prominent feature. And I know what you're thinking. This guy looks an awful lot like Horus, the sky god from our previous episode.
Yes.
They both had falcon heads. And in fact, both had many of the same trappings, the Waz scepter, the ankh. Obviously, the big difference is the headgear. As you pointed out, Horus would wear that double crown representing the north and the south, or upper and lower Egypt. Khonsu, as the moon god, wears, you are correct, a moon disc type of helmet. Not a sun disc, which we've seen before with the likes of Ra, Hathor, Tefnut. This is a moon disc, and as you observed, has not one but two moons, both the full moon, kind of in that round shape, and then the crescent moon underneath. So double your lunar pleasure with this factor. So as we said, he is the god of the moon. That's fitting. There's a side lock of hair, and you sort of see this. We haven't talked much about this season, but there's the traditional hair on a lot of these Egyptian figures is like kind of an elaborate mullet, swept back from the head. You got two thick strands kind of coming down each side. One of those is called a side lock, and so it was. And you didn't see it in this depiction, but often with Khonsu, you would see this side lock, just one of these extensions of hair coming down. It was thought to be a symbol of childhood. Now, in my mind, the only lock of hair that I associate with youth is the sort of rat tail. Unfortunately, was worn by many fellow children of the 80s. Not me, and I don't know about you.
No.
So because it is a symbol of youth, that side lock indicates, we see Khonsu as a strapping young man very often. And of course, he shows up in a lot of later era art. There's a necklace that was popularized by Hathor called the Manat that we mentioned. He's got the crook and flail in some of those other depictions, the sort of shepherd tool that Osiris used to symbolize both the rule and the protection of the pharaoh. Oftentimes in images, he's also mummified, at least partially. Khonsu is. In this image, he's not. He is clearly proudly bronzed, shirtless, and strapping as it should. Right. So, god of the moon, the name Khonsu means traveler, and of course, since the fitting because the moon travels across the night sky. The moon in early Egyptian language is spelled I-A-H, which I assume has the charming pronunciation of Ya, would be the moon. So, similar in terms of epithets, Khonsu had a few. He was known as Embracer, Pathfinder, Defender, and Healer. Now, two of those are the names of automobiles. The other two are not. So as far as I can tell, neither the Ford Embracer or the Nissan Healer ever did materialize. Khonsu was associated with his hometown of Thebes. Now, that is the ancient city where Luxor is today.
Right.
The city of Luxor, not the casino where I won $100 in blackjack with you back in 1998.
Nice.
Which back then, I mean, that was a lot of money in $98, which immediately was blown that night on dinner, if memory serves. His mother was Mut, the mother goddess. Again, very fitting. Mm-hmm. And his father was the aforementioned Amun. So the three of them formed what was called the Theban Triad, the three of them as a sort of nuclear family, and they were highly revered in Thebes, very popular. So beyond the moon itself, specifically, Khonsu is the god of light in the night. So it's the moonlight that is really sort of the source of his influence. He would protect folks against wild animals if you were traveling at night. So I suppose if you need to be on the road in the evening, the extra moonlight would help a traveler see any kind of wild animals coming, give you a little bit of warning. That said, he was also a healer. So if you were out at night and a wild animal got you anyway, Khonsu would be there to help heal you. So
excellent.
Kind of two layers of protection there.
Kind of a triple A.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, he's just out there. If you need to travel at night, he's your guy. Now, the fuller phase of the moon, of course, that's going to be for protection. That's where the most of your light comes from. But the crescent phase had a whole different purpose. So when Khonsu sort of turned on, if you will, the crescent phase of the moon, all sorts of things would happen. This is when women would conceive, which makes sense because the menstrual cycle and the lunar cycle are very similar. So that would happen. Also, cattle would become fertile and produce more cattle. So I suppose this was something all the local steakhouses were very interested in anytime that crescent moon came up. And all nostrils and every throat was filled with air. So apparently in the crescent moon, you can breathe really well.
All right.
So it's very different than what we're used to. I mean, in our current era, we often talk about the full moon as the sort of where all the things get a bit unhinged. It was kind of the opposite here. Back then, it's when you get the crescent moon or the new moon. That's when everyone's procreating. The cows are getting nasty. That everyone's breathing. All the wild things. And for this reason, during the new moon or the crescent moon, Khonsu was known as the mighty bull. And during the full moon, he was known as the neutered bull, which I thought was interesting. Different than what we would expect. So Khonsu shows up, a bit of an interesting arc. In those early texts, like the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, he has this very fierce aspect to him, similar to what you described earlier. And if you are the protector, and if you control the moon and such, and you're offering protection, then you should be fierce and scary. And he was. He was, in some early texts, had a bit of a darker side. He was known as the angry one of the gods. And in the pyramid text, there's a chapter called the Cannibal Hymn, which, again, similar to your bizarre lullaby, you don't think cannibalism and him together. But he was really quite the bloodthirsty god. He, in this story, in the Cannibal Hymn, he helps a dead king to track down, catch, and eat the other gods. So this dead king talks him into tracking them down and making a meal out of other gods. So there's a quote here from the Cannibal Hymn. It was called "Khonsu, who slew the lords, who strangles them for the king, and extracts for him what is in their bodies." So a dark start to those early texts. In the coffin texts, which are discovered a little bit later, he is called Khonsu, who lives on hearts. And he is capable of sending out, quote, the rage which burns hearts. So he is deploying both the literal and the metaphorical depiction of the heart there, both as a sort of snack, the seat of emotion. So definitely a darker version. He also had a baboon form in a little bit of a less bloodthirsty way. He was known as the keeper of the books at the end of the year. So apparently the gods would write down at the beginning of the year the names of all the people who were going to die in the year ahead. And Khonsu was the one to keep track of this book. He was sort of like an accountant of death. But for some reason is also a baboon somehow. So that was another piece of his job. In a slight variation of that, he was also known as the decider of lifespans. So to some of these accounts, he was not only managing the books, but also making decisions, making calls on who was going to die when, how long people were going to live. And as a result, as you can imagine, everyone kind of wanted to be on Khonsu's good side. He was keeping that book, and you wanted to keep him happy. Now, those are the darker earlier days. Later on, Khonsu's reputation softened a lot. He becomes mostly seen as gentle, compassionate. You got to admit, that's quite a turnaround. You're doing cannibalism and chasing down, gods,
fellow gods,
to eat them, and then over time you become the protector. So later in the game, this is when he really kind of hits his stride in what we call the New Kingdom. Now, of course, this is still the 16th to the 18th century BC, so new being a very relative here.
Yeah.
But in those later eras, in his more highly reputable phase, he was known as, quote, the greatest god of the great gods. Wow. So very high praise. The Temple of Khonsu is at Karnak, very well preserved to this day, in very good shape still today. And lots of depictions of Khonsu there. He's depicted inside in the wall paintings as this great snake who fertilizes the cosmic egg in the creation of the world. There's a little bit of selective history of retconning here because, of course, Khonsu was in the second generation, had a mother and a father, probably wasn't there at the very beginning. But hey, you know what? It's his temple. If they want to show him being the sexy snake that starts things off, why not?
Right.
And I just point it as a side note. I did not know until preparing for this episode how many cultures use the egg to symbolize the cosmic beginning of things. So you've got, Formosan mythology and what's now Taiwan, the Vedic tradition from the Sanskrit scriptures, the Zoroastrians in what is now Iran. They all had eggs that started the world.
Okay.
They were not worried about what came first. The chicken and the egg.
They knew.
It was very decided. It was just a settled business, all about the egg. So I guess that makes sense biologically. I tend to associate the egg not with the origin of the world, but just the origin of a hearty breakfast. So things have come a long way. We talked about the healer. So Khonsu's reputation as that healer was strong, even in the lands outside of Egypt. So similar to Bez, who had reached beyond the borders. There are stories of Khonsu even being able to heal sort of remotely, if you will. So there was a princess way out in Bekten, which is now Afghanistan, was very sick, was cured instantly of an illness by the mere image of Khonsu. Just seeing a picture allowed her to be healed. So that's all it takes. So now that you think about it, since I showed you that picture of Khonsu earlier, you might be breathing a little easier, feeling heart rate is very pleasant. Some have that as a picture, some have it as a statue, but either way, just the image of Khonsu healed this princess. This also happened with kings. So King Ptolemy IV, the pharaoh, also had a very serious illness, and Khonsu's influence helped to heal him. And so much so that he called himself, the king said, I am beloved of Khonsu, who protects his majesty and drives away evil spirits. So once again, it pays to be on Khonsu's good side.
Yeah.
It will get you healed. Now, normally, Andrew, we save some of the more pop culture stuff for the later categories, more of this sort of the influence. I'm going to appeal to a text here that's a little bit more latter day, not departing a bit from the traditional texts.
Right.
Since you
I got started,
I feel like the door is open for a looser interpretation.
I got no standing to object.
I don't know if it's literature, but there is a book series called The Kane Chronicles. The author is Rick Riordan, pretty contemporary.
Yep.
Series of books. The main characters, Carter and Sadie, they end up joining up with Bez, the dwarf god that you talked about in the first part of the show. The three of them had to traverse the 12 houses of night in the Egyptian underworld, the Duat, and they didn't want to run out of light. Apparently the amount of moonlight, very important to a lot of these evening travelers. So that they would get some extra light, they decided, the three of them, Bez and our two heroes, would gamble with Khonsu. They would challenge him to a game in the hopes of winning a few extra hours of moonlight to help guide their way. Now, so this is a thing, according to this book, you can do. You can come to Khonsu, you can offer to play a board game against him. If you win, you get extra moonlight. So the game itself is called Senet, S-E-N-E-T, an old Egyptian board game. I kind of originally assumed this was going to be just some sort of lost version of Monopoly or Chutes and Ladders or whatever. But in fact, it was very important. It was sort of like the game was played very in a very widespread way. It was left. Sometimes they would leave the game in the tombs of the dead to help guide them through the underworld. And once they got to the underworld, they would play it for entertainment in the minds of those who would leave these. So somehow it is still played today, although nobody quite knows what the rules are. So I don't know how that works out. There are these
Maybe
pieces. So it's sort of, we'll call it like Egyptian checkers. It's like it's got pieces, it's got a board. So in the book, in this trilogy, Khonsu has a more modern day appearance. So he's kind of depicted as a smooth talking, kind of extroverted, kind of a gambler type. He's in his 20s. He's got this kind of Italian cut, very nice suit that's silver. He's got lots of bling. He's got a necklace of the crescent moon. So essentially he's dressed like the guy trying too hard at the nightclub, or one of the athletes on draft night, just really taking it far. So not only is he able to grant extra moonlight if you beat him at what we'll just call it Egyptian checkers, he can also turn back time using his silver Rolex. Now, this is clearly a more modern interpretation, but there's a catch. So if you gamble with Khonsu and you lose, he then is able to take what is called your Ren. And that is the part of your soul that defines your experiences and your identity. So he's really that. The stakes are very high.
Yeah.
Yes, you'll get your moonlight if you beat him, but he's pretty good. And if he wins, he essentially gets to devour what's pretty much the most important part of your soul. So high stakes are the heroes of the book. Carter and Sadie end up winning, but Bez loses, which costs him not just the benefit of a well-lit evening journey, but he loses part of his soul in the bargain. Now, as a footnote within that, and I alluded to this earlier. So there's another story in the same trilogy where Bez has a secret crush on a woman named Bast. I don't know if that's the same one you described or not.
Right, maybe.
Wanted to spend more time with her to get this crush underway, to try to get something going with it. So this is earlier, before this story even happened. He challenged Khonsu at Egyptian checkers to win that extra time in the moonlight to do his seduction. And in losing the bet, in this case, Khonsu did not take part of his soul, but he did give up a few feet of his height, which explains, at least in this telling, why he has the appearance of a dwarf. So also high stakes. Any number of theories could be behind that. So a bit of a darker sort of scoundrel-like character is Khonsu in this tradition. Now there's fan sites for this book. And one of these fan sites has an interview, and I use that in quotes. Debatable journalism, but the journalist asks Khonsu about the experience, like what's it like to consume the Ren part of the soul when you win these games of Egyptian checkers. And Khonsu kind of leans in. He says, I always forget that you mortals have no concept of how a Ren tastes. Imagine the finest cut of steak in the world, prepared to perfection. Now imagine that in addition to the meat, you're consuming all the memories of, the personality of, the entire essence of the cow itself. And he pauses with this look of insatiable hunger. The interviewer then immediately stops the interview because it just doesn't seem like it's going off the rails.
No. Yeah.
Hard to imagine how taking on the memories and the personality of the cow would
I think after one, I think you pretty much got it.
I can't imagine that would make this steak experience better, but Khonsu seems to think so. So an interesting sort of latter era chapter starts in a dark place, kind of rehabilitates and then ends up in modern day as something of a gambler. So that's Khonsu, controller of the moon, protector of nocturnal travelers, perpetrator and enthusiast of fertility among women and cows. Occasional cannibal, from time to time. Sexy world fertilizing snake, modern day telling as a sketchy but often successful high stakes gambler. So a bit of a checkered character there is Khonsu, but a lot to chew on.
Yes, very much so.
So there is our second competitor. So this should be an interesting set of categories. These are two, I would say, not entirely different, certainly different in look and feel,
right,
and tradition. Both protectors, both having some connection to the protection of others, and but clearly two characters that are going to go at it shortly after
this
next breather. So let's come back and get to our 5 categories right after this.
All right. All right, and we are back for our categories. We have 5 categories. We will determine who will be the winner of this round and go on to our finale. And we start, as always, with Immortal Combat. And that is, again, who would win in a physical confrontation, generally thought of as one-on-one, but we can always bring in a little bit of an entourage if that'll help decide a tie. So I think Bez comes off pretty well here. I mean, just starting with his nickname is the Fighter, or at least one of his nicknames. So his willingness to fight is not in question.
Right.
He would be depicted fighting snakes. He would be depicted fighting demons. And he wore that leopard skin around his neck in kind of the preppy sweater way. And that was believed to have been a trophy from some sort of battle. So he bested a leopard and was very proud of it. He would use various tools for making loud noises. He could roar like a lion, or bang a drum, or just to scare malevolent spirits away. He apparently was able to withstand very pungent odors.
Yes,
did not bother him. That olfactory weapons, he had that in his arsenal.
Yes.
He would often carry a sword or a knife. If we would talk about entourage, Tawaret, who is that part hippo, part lion, part crocodile deity, certainly would be an ally on his side and a fearsome one.
Yeah.
At that, and so you may expect, because he's a dwarf deity, that Bez was short, and usually he was, but in some cases, such as a papyrus known as the Brooklyn Papyrus, he is described as 1,000,000 cubits tall.
What?
And he carries the sky in his strong arms, according to that papyrus. So he apparently had some sort of embiggening agent that he could use, especially if the sky needed to be held up. He could do that too.
Apparently, the residents of the other Brooklyn were also prone to hyperbole, it would seem.
Yeah. So, and then he also had that pantheistic Bez, but it's not clear what powers pantheistic Bez would have had, and I'm not sure how practical really is. He got 3 or 4 different heads, and he does have some wings on him, but he's got like a head coming out of his foot. So which I believe that's where Anubis's head comes out of his foot.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but he certainly not a figure I would want to tangle with.
No.
So not a lot of detail, but I think the overall vibe is somebody who is fixing for a fight.
Yeah.
So what do you got on Khonsu there?
And I think you said Bastet was one of the gods sort of that were part of that that pantheistic aspect. So once again, using a cat as a weapon, which is a recurring theme that we've heard throughout the season. That's interesting in a slightly more obscure way. So I think Khonsu shows up pretty well here. Of course, he first and foremost is able to control the moon in the evening light. So provided the fight happened in the evening, he'd be in very good shape to at least work the environment. It occurred to me a little earlier that he, I think, would theoretically be able to control the tides as well. Because of course that is determined by the gravitational pull of the moon. I don't know that ancient Egyptians knew that.
No,
that may predate that science. So we may or may not consider that within his tool set. And again, if the fight is by the water, he can at least manipulate the tides.
Yeah.
We talked about the bloodthirsty element of that early version, that fierce nature. He still, let's remember, has a falcon head, so he can peck at you if he needs to.
Yeah.
And remember, Khonsu was called the greatest god of the great gods, so I imagine they don't just hand out nicknames like that. Probably pretty good in a fight. Had the nickname of defender, so had those skills. And it was also, of course, a healer. So if he did get injured in the fight, he could theoretically heal himself if he needed to. And maybe the secret weapon of all of it is he's got that magic Rolex that can control time. So if he makes a mistake, he can just dial it right back and try again. Or if he gets in trouble, he could just gamble his way out of it and work his way through that. So I think this is one of those rare instances where we do have evidence of these two having at least maybe not a physical confrontation, but having moments together in the gambling realm. And in both of those cases, it seems we know that Khonsu got the better of Bez. So maybe different in physical confrontation, right. But at least in those stories, it cost him both part of his soul and part of his height. So given all that, given the added evidence of past confrontations, I think I give Khonsu the benefit of the doubt on this one. With all due respect to Bez and his fierceness, I think just the sort of supernatural control that Khonsu brings, combined with that bloodthirsty element that is still within him, I think gives him the edge in my book.
Interesting. And I will say when we talk about the gambling, I recall in episode 3 in Thoth's episode that Thoth was said to have played checkers against the moon to gain those 5 days in order for Osiris and Set and their sisters to be born.
That's right.
And though that it was not named as Khonsu as such, but that does predate Mr. Riordan. So yeah, but I'm gonna go. I think I'm gonna agree with you that is probably Khonsu. I think it'd be an interesting battle. I think that persuasive to me is that passage about being a cannibal of the gods. So that
yes,
that implied at least that he was seen as able and willing to attack and fight other gods,
right.
On behalf of Mummy Pharaoh.
That's right. Yep.
So maybe on behalf of the podcast, not that much of a stretch.
Yes.
So I don't know. So I think we have a winner there.
Okay.
And that will go to Khonsu. So that brings us to our next category, which is curriculum deity. And this is who has that it factor? Who would you rather be? Who would you rather follow? And I think you'll go first on this one.
Yeah. So I mean, it's always nice to be well regarded and worshipped, and Khonsu certainly was revered by the people, by kings, even in foreign lands outside of Egypt. Very much appreciated and honored. Everybody wanted to be in his good side. In terms of I would like to be that. I appreciate the reverence. In terms of being able to control the moon, I don't know how useful that would be. It could be a nice party trick, I guess. It's sort of almost a little bit of magic to entertain. Not sure I'd be into the whole cannibal thing. I think that's certainly a darker chapter. I don't know that I would want to make as part of my existence. That said, I would love to be able to reach for my Rolex and turn back time when I make a mistake. I would even settle for just a regular Rolex, frankly. It doesn't even need to have the time travel.
Right.
So some pretty good, mixed bag in terms of whether you'd want to be him. Had some really great temples. As I said, many of which, particularly in today's Luxor, remain in pretty good shape. In terms of worship, so cult locations in Memphis and Hebus and Edfu. The main cult center was there in Thebes in his hometown. He did have an annual festival of New Year's, which apparently, not only kicking off the year, but making sure all the paperwork of who was going to die that year was all set. Right. And during that, they would kind of have similar to some of these festivals we've talked about. There would be a statue of Khonsu that they would put on a sacred bark. They would parade it through town. There was a falcon's head at both the prow and the stern. Not much else in terms of raucousness at that particular festival. It seemed fairly ceremonial, but good locations for worship. Pretty solid. And because of his proven ability to be protective, lots of company in having others we worship to worship him alongside you. So pretty good ranking there. Yeah.
Pretty good. Yeah. So on curriculum deity, Bez's character is mostly depicted as joyful, as playful. You notice he had that tongue sticking out.
Yes.
He was always down for a party. One of the stories that the later versions of Hathor's Returning Goddess. Well, again, it's Thoth and Shu who bring her back. When she comes back, Bez is there for the party. He's in monkey form, but he kind of keeps her, makes sure she stays happy, and kind of plays along, and then throws down for the party. Loves to dance, loves kids, make them laugh. But on the other side, he's on call all the time. He's on every birth infant in trouble in Egypt. He's on call every dawn. He's getting up to help Ra out through his birthing process. And we have that one theory that the reason his appearance is a little unconventional is because the result of so many battles with demons. So that certainly took a toll.
Sure.
We don't get a lot about relationships. He certainly has a working relationship with Taweret and Beset. And they could, both of them could be consorts, could be a work colleague. We don't know. Taweret's kind of certainly an interesting deity to hang out with, mishmash of beastly body parts, but it's heart in a good place. Seems all right. So, pretty good there overall, I think. In terms of worship, again, an interesting story here, because Bez really had no independent priesthood. And he would be represented at almost all of Hathor's temples, most of Horus's temples, especially if it was Horus the child section of the temple. In Saqqara, there's they call it an incubation center, or where pilgrims would come and stay the night in hopes of having erotic dreams to cure their infertility.
Oh, okay.
So they would just go overnight to this incubation center with Bez, with a number of other deities, but he was prominently featured there for them to cure those issues. Of course, you had the birthing centers, and again, some women you could get a tattoo, which is popular at least among women. Would get tattoos of Bez on their thighs, and not sure why they did it. One theory was that it was to promote fertility. But another was that it was to ward off STDs.
Okay.
So,
and why not? If you can cover both, that seems like a win-win. Yeah.
Right. And so again, for most of the time, he doesn't have his own priesthood, but he finally gets his own priesthood at a town of Abdios, which is an offshoot of an Osiris temple, and his priesthood was there to protect what were thought to be the relics of Osiris, and so that they brought in some Bez priests to be so good at protection. But and this stood until about 359 A.D. When one of the Roman emperors at the time embraced Christianity and shut the Osiris temple down. And he also had his own temple again late in the game at a place called Bawati, and this is an isolated oasis well to the east of the Nile. So you're not a super convenient location, but it did last into the late stages of paganness because of its isolation.
Had a good run.
Yeah, so an interesting one, and obviously you also could just wear an amulet, So one thing I think I like about Bez worship is it seems a little bit low commitment.
Yeah.
You could wear an amulet, have it carved in your headboard, and usually I think that would kind of do.
Yeah, easy entry. Yeah.
I think I'm going to go with Bez. He's got a little bit. Sometimes when I think about him, I think of maybe as a little mini Ernest Hemingway. He's out there. He's fighting and loving and laughing and kind of embracing life. So
sure.
I think I'm gonna go with that.
I think I like where you're going with that. I think you often remind us that is the it factor, and I think he did seem to be in a good mood, had a good time, mixed it up. I like the Hemingway comparison, almost a little bit of Tyrion Lannister in there as well.
Yeah,
just due to the stature, but also the love of life, the sort of bacchanal that surrounded him. Yeah, I think there's something to that. Clearly, was a very popular figure in the day, very revered and present and iconic even, and had a good time. So yeah, I too am going to go with Bez on this one.
All right, excellent. That makes us tied up 1-1, keeping people at the edge of their seats.
That's right.
So we are into third category, which is good God.
Yes.
And I'll go first on this one. So, his epithet, supporter of everything good and hater of everything evil. It's a good start. It maybe it's just good propaganda, but it is, as you said, hard to argue with that. Right. Helping pregnant women and babies is a definite W. In this category. So that's kind of his what he seemed to spend the most of his time doing. He was a party guy, but he used that to help rehabilitate Tefnut and Hather and bring them back into society.
Yep.
So no indication that he ever got out of hand with that. He would rid areas of dangerous animals like snakes or leopards. The Egyptians definitely had a different standard on animal rights than we did, so they took that as a W, yes. For sure. We don't know the leopard that he was wearing. We don't know that story per se, but I presume the leopard was threatening. Before, but maybe not. Maybe he just wanted to wear it. Again, he's protector of Ra and Horus in baby form. One slight down mark, at least through some of his worshipers, these Roman legionaries, he was a participant in Roman imperialism, but I don't know how much we can blame him for that.
No, that's really more of a retro thing. Yeah.
But overall pretty good. I would say.
I think Khonsu is our classic mixed bag here. It's really hard to get around that cannibal stuff in the early stages. The only real excuse there is that, if memory serves, cannibalism was a lot more prevalent in those early days before, I believe, Osiris,
right,
in one of his first acts as king, said, "Hey guys, let's cool it on the cannibalism, shall we?" Right. So since these are very early texts, very possible it was the style at the time, but it still seemed rather bloodthirsty, rather grotesque, not just cannibalizing himself, but aiding and abetting other cannibals. Character-wise, hard to reconcile that. Now, of course, as we said, big turnaround after that. You got to score some points for the healing, the protecting, the aiding in fertility, all good things to sort of balance that out. But then again, if it's a head-to-head competition, virtually all those were also accomplished by Bez. So there's almost a bit of canceling itself out there. The sort of later era gambler era feels a little deviant, I think, in terms of character, but in his defense, he does establish the terms up front. People know what they're getting into when they play Egyptian checkers with Khonsu. And people know he's pretty good at it. So, better beware in that case. And they've seen what happens when you lose. So on this one, I feel like the edge, at least in my view, goes to once again to Bez.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to. We just, at least from what we have, we don't get any stories of him really doing kind of anything bad. He's always a protector. Always kind of seems to be acting out of that impulse.
Right.
So I think even though overall I don't think among deities, I think Khonsu's maybe in the top half of character. Certainly, if we bring in the Greeks and the Romans,
right?
No, I think we're gonna have to also go with Bez. So that gives us 2-1.
Yeah,
going into 4.
And clearly, Bez's predilection for indecent exposure and genitalia exposure wasn't that big of a deal, because clearly he was everywhere and people were comfortable with it. So
it was not considered offensive at the time. Much like the cannibalism. So, all right. So that brings us to our 4th round, which is iconography.
Yes.
And that is who has the better legacy with us today. And I believe you'll go first on this one, Matt.
I will. So viewers of Marvel's Moon Knight series and the comic books before that will recognize Khonsu as a key figure in that. In the show, Khonsu was voiced by the great F. Murray Abraham of Amadeus fame.
Yeah.
And of course, the lead character, Moon Knight, is this guy who is revealed to be an avatar of Khonsu. So Khonsu is in the background being his mysterious self, but our hero is inhabited by him very slowly. Ultimately, Khonsu allows the main character, gives him supernatural abilities so he can go fight evil in his name, but he also slowly drives him insane, wondering whether or not he's possessed or if he's got a split personality. So he in the show, of course, was played by Oscar Isaac, who is dark-haired, very handsome, and in the show is a Cub fan from Chicago. So I immediately can relate to this guy in at least those ways. The fact that he is slowly driven insane and only barely notices for a long time, also very befitting to any Chicago Cubs fan. Khonsu also shows up in the Night at the Museum series. There's this golden tablet that can channel Khonsu's rays down to the tablet, and they can rejuvenate its powers every night, sort of like a divine light empowered iPad, I guess is how you talk about it. And it's that light that can bring the exhibits in the museum to life. But if it gets too far away from Khonsu's moonlight for too long, they all die. All the museum exhibits just go back to being regular museum exhibits. Yes.
I did not recall that at all. No,
that's right. Yeah. Khonsu, was a popular god, was a popular baby name for a while in the old days, less so now. BBM is going to be pretty low on that. I mentioned the Kane Chronicles earlier, where he's clearly an important figure. Khonsu is also the name of a metal band from Bergen, Norway. I listened to a little bit of it, maybe not my style, but the description that the band writes about their music feels very Khonsu. So I'm going to read that for you. Heavy guitars are slicing and crushing with stunning precision and elegance. Massive and thundering keyboards weave dense textures. Metal and industrial collide to shape dark forms and structures. The falcon-headed Egyptian moon god Khonsu becomes incarnate. So, if nothing else, these Norwegian dudes really commit to the name. So there's that. There is a pharma company called Khonsu Pharmaceuticals, I guess.
Oh, healing, I guess.
I guess so. I mean, they have a presence in India and China. They are dedicated to trying to treat disease as a result of inflammation in human and animal health.
Okay.
So I guess they could have, if they have a breakthrough, like maybe if your cat gets arthritis, they can come through on that. Yeah. Seems pretty early stage. Yeah. Couple of interesting commercial products. Khonsu is a lovely summer dress, a twist on the traditional summer dress. It's got adjustable straps, V-neck, asymmetrical pleated and laser cut insert, and very nice little summer wear for this time of year. The second commercial product is a Khonsu CBD male enhancement gummies. So a dietary supplement includes CBD, drawn, of course, from the cannabis hemp plant. That is promoted to, promote health and sexual vitality, general health and well-being. It's supposed to enhance users' sexual performance and satisfaction. So I guess I see why they chose Khonsu for the name. He has a certain virility to him. It's hard for me to associate cannabis and sexual virility. It's more like, couches, video games, cereal, sure, but just I don't see that connection. I was almost about to click the link to learn more. I candidly was just afraid to do that, fear of just being hounded by banner ads for this stuff for the rest of my life. So I ceased my research there. But for any listeners who are interested and who are looking for CBD-based male enhancement gummies, look no further than the good people of Khonsu.
Ask for it by name, yeah.
That's right. So that's what we have for the modern day legacy of the moon god.
All right, excellent. So some interesting stuff there. Obviously the Marvel one is a good get. So I had, in addition to the Kane Chronicles, where Bez also gets, it seems to be a decent character in there. There are some other literary things, maybe not quite to the popularity of the comic book or the Disney Plus channel miniseries.
Right.
But there's the story of Bez, a children's book. And so the synopsis says, two worlds collide as Andy, a modern-day boy, experiences an encounter of the weirdest kind in the jumbled attic of his recently deceased grandmother. It is there, among the piles of his grandmother's treasures, in quotes, that Andy comes face to face with Bez, the pint-sized god of ancient Egyptian legend, who has come to recover the lost scroll containing a very special story. The story of Bez.
Wow. It's even got an Andy in there, so you got a connection to it.
And then there is the a sci-fi book from the early 2000s called Pyramid Scheme. Pyramid Scheme. And it says in this one, an alien pyramid has appeared on Earth, squatting in the middle of Chicago. It is growing, destroying the city as it does. And nothing seems to be able to stop it, not even the mighty U.S. military. Somehow the alien device is snatching people, and for unknown reasons, transporting them to the world of mythology. And so Bez is a character in that, and he is one of the few gods on the people's side. And that, not sure if the pyramids ever stopped or just takes over the world. He's a character.
The appearance of a pyramid in a lakefront Midwestern city is really giving me flashbacks to just days ago.
Right.
Fascinating.
Daunting. So Bez is a character in a couple of video games, one, The Forgotten Realms, and is a series. There's a series of Bez branded beers, including Bez Pomegranate Sour Beer, which seemed interesting. And on the the babies per million, there were less than 5 babies per year named Bez, and even not even sure if any of those were named for the god. So, but this is kind of his big get. So I mentioned that Bez worship spread throughout the Mediterranean, and this included the Phoenicians. So in 680 BCE, a group of Phoenician sailors discovered and settled an island off the coast of Iberia, and finding that island was free from snakes and predators, the amazed and grateful Phoenicians named it the island of Bez, and today that island is known as Ibiza.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a party spot to this day.
Big time. Ibiza, I believe they call it. Ibiza, yes. Wow. I wouldn't have put that together, but considering his hard partying ways, that fits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That fits. So, even though, Ibiza, as you say, is a good get, it's... Yes. I'm going to have to go with Khonsu on this one.
Yes, I think Khonsu does get the edge. Although, if you had a night to yourself and wanted to drink a couple of those Fez sour beers and pop a couple of CBD gummies just to see what happens, you could enjoy the benefits of both. But yes, I think Khonsu gets my vote here as well.
All right. So that, of course, puts us back into a tie. And so once again, as so often is the case, we go into the final deciding round, most important category, ironclad category of Matinee Idol, where we decide who would make the better movie or limited series.
Right.
All right. So I'm going to start this one off. So I had a lot of thinking to go through on this one. Looking at the iconography and the depictions of Bez and the various jobs he had, from daycare to fighting snakes and leopards and dancing and celebrating. Yep. I felt like there's kind of a lot of backstory that needs to get filled in. And so that's kind of the direction I went. So I pictured Bez, it's kind of an origin story, starting out as a tough fighter, who likes to kick demon butt, fighting scorpions and leopards and going to wild celebrations, before, after, and during the fighting of these foes. So we open up with Bez, and he's clashing with a leopard that we find out is possessed by the forces of chaos in order to attack and disrupt a festival of Hathor. and steal the goddess's sun crown. So while she's attacking late in the night, while she's a little bit incapacitated with that red beer, and they're going to take that sun crown and use it against the solar bark. We get a bit of a big action scene in the midst of the party, knocking over the red beer fountains, scattering party goers, while Hather sort of amusingly, blithely stumbles through the party, oblivious to what's going on around her.
Right.
Bez, of course, does defeat the leopard, taking its hide as a trophy and cape. But before he can even celebrate, he gets called up to meet the big guy, to meet Ra at dawn, where he's given a new mission by Ra, who's giving him these commands in newborn form. At this point, Bez expresses his distaste, for the infant form, and doesn't like, taking orders from a baby.
Right. Understandable.
Yeah. So who would? But this new assignment is for this rough and tumble gargoyle-looking guy is to go undercover and protect Horus, the child, who is now just entering his new kindergarten class as undercover as the kindergarten teacher for the class.
Okay.
So now, of course, there's an adorable clash between this gruff war deity who has to shepherd some adorable 5-year-olds. He's also introduced to a sweet first grade teacher who's in the next room.
Sure.
Who has a very similar name, Basset. But he is smitten, and therefore he needs to in order to impress her, not only prove he's good at fighting, but prove he's good with the kids.
Yeah.
And so slowly he wins the kids over to him, but towards the end of the year, they finally get the big attack where Apophis, Set team up, and Bez has to fight them off. Wins the day, wins the girl, protects the kids, and it has learning and growing along the way, and then pledges himself to become that protector of women and children. So after that, and of course, I'm thinking of calling this one Kindergarten God. So
there you go. Yes, and I assume he gets the girl in the end.
Oh yes, he gets the girl. Yeah, that's part of the learning and growing. That's
that's the much more heartwarming story than I was expecting from this this pugnacious pugilist.
Yeah.
Yes, very good. Okay. I will take a slightly different route on this.
I'm sure you will.
There are many. There's parameters here, right? So there is Moon Knight, which is a show that does involve Khonsu, so we can't really replicate that. We need to do something different. Similar to many of the figures on this program. Of the many phases of Khonsu, not all are the stuff of a great movie or limited series. The Cannibal Days. It would be hard to identify and make that a sympathetic character. It would be an interesting action movie, him hunting down, gods and killing them with this mummy god. Didn't go that direction. The sort of more mellow latter era where he's the protector, he's essentially doing moon management. Less exciting, less cinematic. But Khonsu's predilection for high stakes gambling. Now that is another story. There's a movie there. So, or perhaps a limited series. So each episode, our hero is approached by somebody who's in desperate need of a few more hours of moonlight to accomplish their most urgent nocturnal activity. They're in a moment that they are in the most important moment of their lives, and if they don't get a little more moonlight, they will fail. So they come as you do, and you challenge Khonsu to his high stakes game of Egyptian checkers. So we're talking about each week, there's somebody in this situation. You've got a would-be lover who's looking to consummate the great crush of his life, similar to what happened to Baz. And you got a surgeon who needs another few hours to complete an emergency surgery, and he just can't do it in the dark. And he's got to separate, let's say, Siamese twins. He can't do it. So he comes and says, how can I get more moonlight? It's gambling. Maybe you've got a military general who needs to mount this surprise attack that's going to win the war, but he can't do it under full cover of night. So he just desperate resorts to having to challenge Khonsu. So each character in this moment of need challenges Khonsu to the Egyptian checkers game. And in thrilling board game fashion, inspired by the Queen's Gambit, Khonsu takes each one down. But remember, winning the game allows Khonsu to then feast upon the Ren part of the soul of the gambler that he has vanquished. So in doing so, he takes on the person, he takes on their essence, he takes on their memories, which means after each match, it's up to Khonsu himself to take over their lives, inhabit them, and finish the urgent task at hand. So we watch in awe as Khonsu loves the lover. He separates and saves the two Siamese twins. He leads the battle under cover of night to win the war. He's successful in all these desperate challenges until one night he's approached by a surprising challenger. Wouldn't you know it? It is a professional gambler who happens to be the greatest Egyptian checkers player of all mortal beings. And his ultimate goal in life, his purpose, is to defeat Khonsu at Egyptian checkers. So the two come together and clash in this epic match, and they're playing, they're back and forth, and then Khonsu realizes he's got an important choice to make. If he lets the gambler beat him, then he has to grant extra moonlight to the gambler, which then the gambler will use to continue playing Khonsu and defeating him again and again for all of eternity. If Khonsu defeats the gambler, he must then take over the gambler's life, forcing him to, wait for it, continue playing Khonsu and defeat him again for all of eternity. So he's stuck in this infinite loop. He's suddenly in this sort of Christopher Nolan-like Inception that goes to eternity. So just when we think the show is going to continue forever, then Khonsu remembers he can turn back time using his special time Rolex watch. So he does so. He then adds the gambler's name to his ledger of people who must die that year. Skips town, takes a nice long vacation in the Italian Riviera, knowing that he has broken this infinite loop. So in that last shot, we see him reclining. We see Khonsu in Capri. He's sipping a Negroni, relaxing by the sea, wearing, of course, his signature crown with the two moons that are his signature item. The camera slowly zooms in on the Rolex watch that he has used to save the day. On the screen, we see a tagline, a crown for every achievement. That's the tagline of Rolex watch. And we realize this whole thing has been one big advertisement for Rolex watches the whole time. Brilliant. They've sucked us in. Gambit of Souls is what I'm calling it. Coming soon to a streaming network near you. And of course, sponsored by the good people at Rolex. Now, a final note on this. If anyone at Rolex is listening, please do get in touch. I'd be happy to develop this script in exchange for some products. A new watch would be great. And I should reveal as well to you, Andrew, the last 22 episodes of God versus God, all 33 hours of content have all secretly been the buildup to me pitching Rolex.
Wow.
So, as much as you and all of our listeners probably wishing you had the ability to dial back those 32 hours to do something more productive, no such luck. You have all been incepted. And
interesting.
Yes.
All right. Very interesting. I like the pitch for the sponsorship.
Yes.
Certainly, this effort to save the world is not without its costs. So
that's right. Nothing's free.
Yeah, nothing is free. I think I'm going to go with Khonsu on this one. I think he got me on that the Inception metaphysical tale. Yeah, I also would have liked, if you gotten a little bit of the cannibalism in there, work that in, but
maybe that can be a flashback, a little bit of origin story just woven in. We'll see how the folks in Rolex corporate feel about that. They're going to have to sign off on the treatment, so that might
that's true.
Might be off brand.
They want their watches associated with cannibalism. I don't know.
It's probably frowned upon. Yeah, I think I too will go with Khonsu. I like the treatment. I enjoyed the kindergarten influence. That was very heartwarming. But yes, I think in our time of Christopher Nolan and Oppenheimer and split dimensions and timelines, I think this one's got a tendency to break through. So I believe Khonsu wins the day.
That is it, right? So that makes us 3-2, and that is makes Khonsu the winner of this round and candidate for the Golden Ale.
And speaking of friends, we are getting to that point of the season. So just quickly before we wrap here, we are combining our finale of season 2, which will be in our next and final installment for the season. We did in 2 parts last year. This year we're going to combine them into, because the season's a little bit shorter, so we're going to combine them into one supercharged episode. We're going to choose the top finishers of this throughout the season, as we did last time. We'll determine our 2 finalists, and then the second half of the episode, we will then have our 2 finalists battle it out, as we did last time, in 3 new categories to determine brand new categories to determine the season winner, who of course will be able to join our modern day pantheon and help to save us for our troubled times. So a lot on the hook this time. To join our season 1 winner, whom I still refuse to name. In the event folks are still catching up on those other 33 hours.
I do think that I think in that finale, I think we were going to have to go through who the season 1 winner is, but we'll give you plenty of spoiler warning, because I think there's some achievement that winner has had that we want to tout as part of the bona fides of the program.
Important, yes. So we're getting, this is almost like a spoiler alert in advance of the alert. You will be warned in that episode, but that's something to look forward to, and this will be it'll be a recap to a fascinating season, quite unlike our first one, but no less fascinating and no less bizarre.
Yes, very much so.
We'll call that a success. Well, let's call it a show. Thank you, Andrew, as always, and our thanks, as always, to the great DJ Andy Snow, andysnow.dj, for providing our theme music. You've heard from the very beginning that to be on our good side and to receive benefit of the salvation of our ultimate pantheon, please do subscribe. Please do pass on the good word. Leave highly flattering 5-star reviews. Tell your friends and find us in the socials. Andrew, I think you're going to have to add a lot of these images to the social feed once the episode comes out. Some of these additional images, particularly of Bez, to alert the listener, the viewer, to be able to get that sense. And of course, last but not least, the official God versus God playlist, season 2, Rock Like an Egyptian, is being added to for each episode, and this week will be no exception. So go check that out on Spotify.
Yep.
And that will do it. Well done as always, good sir. Always a pleasure.
You too.
And folks, thanks for listening. We will see you on the season finale.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.